Hello and welcome. I'm Steve Clemons, editor-at-large of The Hill, and we're going to spend the day together today. We're delighted to have you joining us for America's Unfinished Business, a summit on LGBTQ plus equality. I'd like to thank our sponsors, the Rockefeller Foundation, and also Philip Morris International for their support of today's program. 51 years after the Stonewall riots and half a century after the first New York Pride March, there's been monumental progress on LGBTQ plus rights. Same-sex couples have won the right to legally marry. Millions of gay, lesbian, and transgender workers are now covered by the federal anti-discrimination law. There are still some miracles. And despite attempts to block implementation, transgender service members are openly serving in the military. Many of the successes have been driven by mainstream cultural shifts, and committed allies have won long-fought battles at the local, state, and federal levels. Yet the civil rights that same-sex couples and LGBTQ plus citizens have secured are fragile, and they're increasingly in doubt in a country that is deeply divided along many lines. Many Americans continue to suffer daily discrimination, marginalization, and violence in their homes, schools, neighborhoods, and workplaces. In acts seen and unseen, big and small, LGBTQ plus youth continue to struggle with mental health as they come of age and grapple with the difficult decision to come out to their families and friends. In the past few weeks, the Black Lives Matter movement has jolted the nation into truthfully confronting systemic racism. There are parallels that can be drawn with the LGBTQ plus struggle for equal rights. Bias and violence targeted at LGBTQ plus people of color is disproportionately higher. One need look no further than the horrific attacks on members of the Black trans community and what they face on a daily basis to see this. Today's program, taking place on the last day of Pride Month, will take stock of the fragility of civil rights in America and the fight for equality today, with a focus on the LGBTQ plus community. We will focus on constructive paths forward, lessons learned, and the nuance and direction of American public attitudes. Our program is going to take place in 3 parts, and we'll give you some breaks. The first hour is the power of pride. We're going to examine how yesterday's hard-fought battles have paved the way for today's leaders. The second hour, from 1:20 to 2:30 p.m. Eastern, will explore the power of partnerships. And then you get another break. And then the third and final session at 3:15 p.m. will focus on the power of equality and how we can secure and make civil rights a reality in our daily lives. We're going to be speaking to some standout leaders today. You'll not want to miss any of the sessions, and we are taking questions from all of you. So email them in, text them in. I've got people screening them. We have some of these will be by video as well. Before we get underway, a few housekeeping notes. You can tweet us at #TheHillLGBTQ. We are broadcasting live and we'll be taking your questions, as I said, throughout the program. And if you experience any trouble with video, I always do, refreshing the page should mostly fix the problem, or so I'm told. Our first guest this morning is Congresswoman Sharice Davids of Kansas. And by the way, I was born in Kansas. I don't know if I was born in her district because I haven't been back in a while, but I'll have to find out. Back in 2017, Representative Davids became the first Native American lesbian woman to serve in Congress. It's a real pleasure to have her here today. The 116th Congress, the most diverse ever, has 10 openly gay, lesbian, and bisexual members serving. Congresswoman, thanks so much for joining us today. I am so excited to talk to you, and I sort of felt that one of the things we need to do in this time is both take stock of some of the achievements we had, but really remind ourselves that the rights world, the civil rights world across the board remains fragile. You've just come to Congress, and I would love to kind of get your sense of where we've made progress and where we need to worry.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for having this 3-part program today. I think people will need a break, but I think that people are really going to enjoy what you're putting on here. So, you know, the thing that I think we have to remember is that every time we make progress, it's a step. And I think for so many of us who got the chance to run for office, win seats in the 2018 election cycle, we saw that those steps to progress continue. And, you know, in this hyper, I feel like the stakes keep getting bigger and bigger. And one of the things that we have to keep in mind is that if we don't keep fighting for progress, that we will see us moving backwards. And so many people have taken to the streets. You mentioned the Black Lives Matter movement. And I think that we're seeing young people and people from across a broad spectrum of communities coming together to say, we want everyone to be treated equally. We don't think that there's a place in this country for racism. We don't think there's a place in this country for bigotry. And I'm feeling optimistic about our future. And some of that is because when you see so many young people stepping up to say, this is the country that I want to live in, and this is the future that I see for myself. Just knowing that young people see a future for themselves in this country that looks the way that they want it to look is, that's cause for optimism right there.
Look, you grew up in a military family, and I assume as you came out, there were sort of issues. I grew up in a military family, and so when I came out, that was also a complicated path. That'll be the story we have from a number of our guests today. But society's out there. It's got its attitudes. And I'm just interested that how you feel you're being dealt with as a member of Congress today. Are your colleagues in Congress, do they, behave like the rest of society, and thus you've got your bigots and your, people who are well-meaning but step on issues that they don't know? I just love to kind of, deal with the personal side for you of what it's like to be there, given who you are.
Yeah, well, that's a really great question. One of the things that I often tell people is that your experience, if you're running for office, and I get the chance to talk to a lot of people who are interested in running for office or are currently running for office, and then, getting here, I find my experience to be a similar thing that your experience, whatever your lived experience is a bit amplified when you decide to run for a political office. And that's the good stuff and the things that are, kind of hard sometimes. And of course, I run into instances where people, just like you said, say things that show me that they probably have not had conversations before that, cause them to wonder how what their lived experience has taught them about other people's lived experiences. And the vast majority of people, though, I think here, at least my experience in Congress has been that people are interested in learning and interested in hearing how things are impacting me as a Native member, as a member of the Equality Caucus. And that's been encouraging to see. For the most part, I think that people are really trying to learn, particularly in the Democratic caucus. I know I've had tons of conversations with folks who are wanting to learn more about issues impacting Native Americans or issues impacting the LGBTQI community. So, but of course, occasionally I run into the conversation that's like a little bit harder, and I have to take a step back and let people know, hey, when you use this term, it can be dehumanizing, and I just want you to know that because people of trans experience have often been marginalized even within the LGBTQ community. And so there have been times where I've, tried to take the opportunity as someone who's in this position right now to educate folks. And for the most part, I think that people are open to that. And I have to ask you, where were you born in Kansas?
Salina.
Oh, okay. It's not.
My dad was in the Air Force, so there was an Air Force base there in the old days. I don't know if it's still there anymore, but I was born in Salina, was probably there for 6 weeks and never went back. So am I in your district?
No, that's not
Darn.
in this district. I ended up living in Kansas because my mom retired from the Army at Fort Leavenworth. Not in.
Well, I look at Grace Street. In our most recent national summit the Hill did, we had Michelle de la Isla, who's the mayor of Topeka and another outstanding person in Kansas. So there are these bright stars from Kansas out there. But let me ask you about something you've been working on. You led the fight in the House to pass the Equality Act as co-chair of the LGBT Equality Caucus. And I don't know the answer to this. So, do we still need an Equality Act given the Supreme Court decision on workplace discrimination and anti-discrimination against LGBTQ individuals?
Oh, we absolutely do.
So what does it do? Tell our audience what the Equality Act achieves.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because I do think that we have to hold on to the bright spots when we see them, and the victories when they happen, and the Supreme Court ruling that LGBTQI folks cannot be discriminated against for purposes of, in their workplace. I think that was a really important victory. It also highlights how much work we still have to do. So, it's so interesting to be the representative from the 3rd District in Kansas, and to know that if I went out to try to get an apartment in Kansas, I could be denied that ability. And because I'm a out member of the LGBTQ community, and I think that's a pretty phenomenal and unfair thing to grapple with. It happens in so many places, and it's still legal in so many places for folks who are part of this community to be discriminated against, whether we're talking about education or housing or healthcare, which is so important right now. I think that the Supreme Court ruling was a victory that we have to kind of embrace and celebrate, but it also highlights how much work we still have to do to make sure that LGBTQI people are not discriminated against anywhere. And the Equality Act would do just that. It would make sure that everyone that's part of this community is treated equally under the law, that we have the same rights and responsibilities under the law as anybody else. And I think that, the harder we can push on that front, the better off our society will be, and particularly our youth. I appreciated your comments earlier that you brought up that LGBTQIA youth actually do see disproportionate numbers of youth suicide and suicidal ideations, and the mental and behavioral health impacts of not feeling like there are people in this society who deem you worthy or of value. I think that, us passing it out of the House sends a strong signal that there are people in the federal government and, in these large decision-making bodies that think that the LGBTQIA community is just as worthy of protection and rights and responsibilities in this country as anybody else.
Let me ask you what you think the role that some of us should play in dealing within the community. I mean, you're Native American lesbian, and that is I'm sure that has its own complexities out there. When I worked for Senator Bingaman of New Mexico, and we had, a lot of tribes and whatnot, and when they found out I was gay, I had all sorts of people coming to me telling me about nightmarish stories about their own coming out, dealing with their families. When we look at the Black trans community, and we're going to have a number of people on today talking about how the LGBTQ community has somewhat pushed them under the rug and pushed them aside, has not remembered the key role that the Black trans community played in Stonewall, for instance, among others. And I'm just interested, just as a human being, what do you think we should do more of to reach out to those people in need in these communities? And I'm sure you're doing that across the board, but particularly in the Native American community.
That's a really great question, and I actually think that one of the things that we all have to be doing is just what you were talking about, is thinking about what, as an individual, am I doing right now to be helpful? And I think we have to be more helpful than harmful in every instance possible. And at the end of the day, I think that as an elected official, I spend a lot of time trying to figure out, okay, who have I talked to already and who have I not talked to? Who are the groups that I haven't had the chance yet to hear from? And as somebody who needs an essential part of my job is to listen, that's something that I do. And I think we could all benefit from doing that, figuring out who have I heard from and who have I engaged with? And that can happen at the individual level, the community level, institutional level. And so I think that's one piece of it. And then the other piece is to, I think, try to figure out what within your purview is a place that you can identify structural barriers for people. When we talk about the equality, LGBTQ equality movement, I think that, there have certainly been communities of color and Black communities that have felt left out by that movement for a really long time. And I think listening to that without getting defensive, and which it's really hard sometimes to face the and this goes to what you were saying earlier, the personal impacts of all of this stuff. We're talking about things that are intrinsic to folks' identity, and trying to make sure that we're listening, that we're open, that we're acknowledging people's experience as being valid, and certainly just as valid as anybody else's experience. My experience is as valid as yours, and yours is
Right.
as valid as mine. And we have to do that at a fundamental level, whether we're talking about individually between each other or the institutions that we're trying to
Right.
make more equitable, trying to make more equal.
Well, I'm very impressed by it, and I know and I've read about the many things that you're doing with the community. We have a question from the audience. Do we have Eric ready to go?
Hi,
Oh,
my name's Eric Axelson. I'm with the LGBTQ Real Estate Alliance. My question has two parts. First, what actionable steps can everyone on this call begin taking today to help ensure passage of the Equality Act in a Biden administration? And second, how can we best ensure that we intentionally include LGBTQ communities of color and the trans community in all our discussions and initiatives as we move forward?
Congresswoman.
That's a good question. And I think that one of the things that we should definitely do is make sure that we have a president that will sign the Equality Act, and I think a Biden presidency would lead to just that. We also have to make sure, so much good legislation sits on the desk of Mitch McConnell right now, and I think that poses a real problem to progress. It is unfortunate that one person has the ability to slow down so much good legislation. I think that the Equality Act is something that, we had something like 12 Republicans on the House side vote for it. I think that nationally, people are supportive of equality. People are supportive of making sure that everyone is treated equally and not being discriminated against. And I think that it would have a good shot of passing through the Senate were it to be brought up for a vote. So I think, one, just what you said, let's get Joe Biden elected to president of the United States. And then two, I think we should all make sure that when we're having conversations, and some people are in positions where this is easier, and some people are in positions where you're probably going to have to fight a little harder to make it happen. But for folks who are sitting at the head of a table or have the ability to convene, I think it's really good to go out and try to reach out to communities that you have not yet talked to. And if what we're talking about is how do we get a more diverse workforce, or if you're running a civil rights organization and you have not had a meeting with anybody who's part of the Black trans community, now's the time. Now is the time to reach out to people that you haven't ever had a conversation with. And it's never too early to start building those relationships and start to learn what are the issues that are impacting communities that I have to learn what issues impact communities that I'm not already a part of. And I think that all of us can do that on an individual level. And then if you have the power to do it in your organization, now is the best time ever. Well, yesterday would have been.
Congresswoman Sharice Davids, I really appreciate it. I could go really the whole hour with you. And one of the things I think would be interesting to talk about, whether it's healthcare, adoption rights, whether it's mental health, whether it's how we're faring in this community. I think you've helped us see a lot of the area where we've made progress, but where our concerns should be. So thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to having you back again.
And I so appreciate you doing this today, and happy Pride, everybody. Let's keep it going.